more dairy intake causes more hip fracture risk. And I was like, whoa, what's going on? And I think that was one of the first days where I was like, this is really troubling because as a pediatrician, I'm making sure my patients get 2 or 3 servings of dairy a day. That's the messaging that we were taught. And so I sort of like, was taken aback by that. And I just, fell into the rabbit hole, started reading a lot more and delving more into that. And at that point, I started questioning everything.
Are you ready to upgrade your health to a new level and do so by learning from experts in the field of lifestyle medicine and plant-based nutrition? Well, you are in the right place. Welcome to the Plant-Based DFW Podcast Weekly Show. We are your hosts, Dr. Rizwan Bukhari and Maya Acosta. Every week, we will feature guests who are either physicians, dietitians, health coaches, or chefs who will tell us about their journeys towards becoming plant-based and how they have helped others. And as you dive into the episodes, never forget, the more you implement these healthy lifestyle changes, the more you will upgrade your health. In today's episode, you will meet Dr. Roxanne George. She is a board-certified pediatrician. She's also a graduate of Cornell's plant-based nutrition certification course. Dr. George is actually from the New Jersey, New York area, and in 2014, she moved just north of Houston in Spring, Texas. In today's episode, we talk about some of the issues that her patients deal with, such as chronic constipation and chronic ear infections, and how plant-based nutrition can actually help remedy those issues. She also gives parents tips on how to deal with picky eaters. Hope that you enjoy this episode. So welcome, Dr. George.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be on your podcast. I've listened and I'm a big fan, so fun to be on.
Last year, I saw you on as part of a panel discussion in Houston at one of the Veg Fests.
Yeah.
And then we saw you again, I think, at the Lifestyle Medicine Conference, right?
I think it was a pediatrician conference, one of those big conferences, though.
We went to so many conferences, who can remember which one, right? In one year, we went to the Holistic Holiday at Sea, Pediatrician,
Lifestyle Medicine,
and
ICNM,
and
Barnard
ICNM,
Center.
all in 1 year. And so, wow. It was a great year, but it all started to run together as far as, who we saw where.
We saw where, yeah, I know, I totally get it.
And then Riz was like, I've had enough. And that's on top of the visits I made to Houston, because I went for some of the Doctors Chawla events that they put together. So I drove like 3 or 4 times, and you went twice with me, I think. So yeah, we were busy last year.
Yeah, but I'm glad we did it, because then this year everything got shut down. So we didn't have an option or an opportunity to go.
I was just going to say, it's a good thing you went last year.
So everything's virtual. And of course, you and I know that because we've been doing a lot of these virtual conferences.
Yes. Yeah. Well, let's get to know a little bit about you, Dr. George. Tell us, are you from the Texas area?
I mean, I'm in Houston right now. I practice just north of Houston in Spring, but I actually grew up in New Jersey, New York, and I was practicing up there until 2014. And when I moved down here, just for, the warmer weather and better hours and things like that. So yeah, it's been nice to be down here. I miss the busyness of New York, but it's fun.
So tell us a little bit about your background. You're a pediatrician. How did where you went to school, your training? Why did you become a pediatrician?
So yeah, I'm a board certified pediatrician, and I have the Cornell certification in plant-based nutrition. I started undergrad. I went to Virginia Commonwealth in Richmond, and had a huge interest in genetic research at that time. And they were part of the Human Genome Mapping, Human Genome Project. So that was my big pull to go there. And
I didn't know you were that old.
Sorry?
Yeah, that's some time ago, right?
Oh yeah, I'm aging myself. Sorry. Yeah, that was a while ago. But I really, really enjoyed it. I got to do different types of research projects, and that's when I sort of developed my passion for research in high school. My high school was very lucky. We had an amazing biology, AP Bio teacher who actually taught us how to do like pipetting and genetics, like research and isolating DNA and all this stuff. So it was like a very unique experience, and that sort of fueled my interest in research in genetics, and got to do transposon research, which is like jumping genes in plant genetics and sort of, that whole concept was sort of new and, in its understanding at that time. Also did cystic fibrosis research and viral research. And so I started to go down this path of like, no, I really, really, really love research. I loved bench research. So after that, I joined Unilever and did some foundational skin study, clinical studies there with some different surfactants or soap studies and things like that. So I'm a research nerd is the bottom line.
You right after college, you did research. You didn't go straight into medical school.
No, I didn't. I was really, sort of overwhelmed with like my love for research. And so I was sort of like, to my family's, dismay, kind of put that on hold and it was like, maybe I'll just go down this research path. And just, I just loved it. I don't know how else to explain it. And so after college, I just wanted to do that. And I went to, after Unilever, I actually joined a program at Howard University School of Medicine to do antibiotic resistance research, was ultimately my passion. So that was my big project. And at that time, being, in the School of Medicine and all of that, I was more interested in kind of getting more interested in going into medicine. So did some, pursued medical school soon after that.
How did you decide that you wanted to work with children?
It chose me, actually. Everyone, all my family and close friends, they were always saying that I would probably be a pediatrician, even from when I was an undergrad. And I was like, sort of like, oh, because I'm a woman, like, you think I'm going to be a pediatrician, and so it didn't really occur to me until after I did my internal medicine rotation. I ended up really not sort of clicking with it. After that, I had my surgery rotation. I had some pediatric cases. And, in those cases, I started talking to the parents and the kids, and I started to be like, wow, I actually really do love it. I'm like, darn it, they were right. And I did my pediatric rotation. It was a no-brainer. It was what I was meant to do. So
where'd you do your pediatrics residency?
Up at Winthrop Hospital, NYU Winthrop, it's known as now, up in Long Island. So it was a great program. We were part of, a children's hospital, and we had two close children's hospitals nearby as well. North Shore and LIJ, had children's hospitals. So it was a really great experience to just, be in New York and see so many different variety of cases. So yeah, I enjoyed it.
So now during this time, how are you seeing your patients? And did you at one point stop seeing them during this time of pandemic?
No, we never shut down. We were always seeing patients. We offered a little bit more virtual visits, telemed visits with our patients during that time for like ADHD cases and things that we could manage sort of more, via telehealth. But no, we were still at every point, we were still seeing patients. So it's, we were lucky luckily our staff and everyone's been okay. But yeah.
What kind of practice are you in? Group practice, individual?
Yeah, it's a group practice. We just have 3 physicians. It's not, super big or anything. Right outside development I, live in. And so it's been really it's a close-knit community. So I know my neighbors, they come and see me. I'll, they'll, call me and be like, can you just come next door? And I'll run down with my stethoscope and like otoscope. And, so it's like a real like small town feel. And I mean, there was one night where I had 3 neighbors that like called me. And so I was just walking around with my doctor bag from house to house. And I was like, well, this is what it used to be like.
Yeah, a long time ago. And so tell me how you got involved or interested in plant-based nutrition. And then maybe how you incorporate that into your medical practice.
Yeah, I love incorporating it into my medical practice. I honestly reignited my love for medicine too, because when I first moved down from New York to Houston, I started having started having these conversations about obesity more and more and more. And I sort of felt like I wasn't sort of making any difference or making any change, just like the messaging wasn't landing. And so I went back to my roots and sort of dug into the research and said, maybe there's something else, like another approach I can take, maybe another sort of, point that will get through to people rather than being like, eat healthy, work out, cut out your fats and eat more. And at that time it was more like eat protein protein and all this kind of messaging that was more around and more, sort of the volume on that was sort of higher. So when I started doing my research, I sort of stumbled on like different things on dairy and milk. And I was sort of like, wait, dairy's, causing like more dairy intake causes more hip fracture risk. And I was like, whoa, what's going on? And I think that was one of the first days where I was like, this is really troubling because as a pediatrician, I'm making sure my patients get 2 or 3 servings of dairy a day. That's the messaging that we were taught. And so I sort of like, was taken aback by that. And I just, fell into the rabbit hole, started reading a lot more and delving more into that. And at that point, I started questioning everything. And so I started being like, okay, is this true? I started looking into vaccines. I started looking into, what is, animal protein? What is it different? Why is this causing that? What is TMAO? I'd never even heard of that. So all this kind of interesting research that, I sort of fell into. And then I started, the first documentary that I saw was actually Fed Up. I don't know if you guys have watched that one, on like sugar intake. And it really talks about children. And so that was the first documentary that I had seen. And the one that, after I watched that, this was like all during kind of the same time frame, the Forks Over Knives like documentary was recommended on Netflix. And I was like, okay, click. And then I was like, oh my God, people know about this? This is a documentary. And so it was like, after that, I actually was in the process of transitioning to the practice I'm at now. And so I had a few months off and I just like downloaded. I was sitting in front of my computer for hours. I got my e-certification and it was just, okay. And then after that, it was like my mission, because my thought is that if parents just knew how bad the bad was and how good the good is, I mean, we can change the world. It's just that the messaging isn't out there. For some reason, we need like a better marketing team or, we have to get this message because everyone is like in moderation. It's a kid's meal. It's okay. They're kids. They can eat like this. And I'm like, no. Let's talk about what you're actually including in that kid's meal. That kid's meal is a habit. You are now telling your child that it's okay to eat this way because, when you have a bad day, you can eat this way. When you have a good day, you should eat this way. When you are in a rush, eat for convenience, not for nutrition. And these are all the underlying messaging that we are sending to our children without even realizing it. But if we knew that processed meat, like if parents really understood, every day I'm saying this message and parents are like, processed meat is a carcinogen?
Yeah. And they have a hard time believing you too because they were raised the same way.
Yeah, right. And it's, and it's time, I always quote Maya Angelou because I just love that quote where when we know better, we do better. Because it's so true. We can't blame our parents and, grandparents because they were battling different things at that time. But at this point, when we know so much, it's been over 20 years of research into these topics that, the bad is terrible and worse than you could imagine. And the good is way better than you even knew. It's time to change. So
our marketing arm is, like you said, it's not well funded.
Right. As Dr. Greger says, no big broccoli, right?
Exactly. The other side is funded by lobbyists, and even the government supports so many of these things. So it is an uphill battle, but we just got to keep putting the message out, right?
This is how we market. This is our marketing techniques now, just spreading the message like this through conversations.
So tell me how, you work this into your practice on a daily basis, and how is it received, and how do your colleagues, how do they respond to this?
My colleagues are, they have their own habits, I guess is the best way to, describe it. They are not negative towards it at all. I don't know that they've sort of understood or taken the time to really, delve into it themselves. I sort of, give them studies and things here and there. But as far as how I incorporate it into my practice, whenever I can, unfortunately in primary care, it's always that time restraint where we have I have 5 to 7 minutes per patient. Pediatrics is all volume based because we just, it's pediatrics and we low man on the totem pole. And so you don't, as a group practice, it's, very limited as far as time. but I always take the time because it's so important. And I have to say, in the last 2.5 to 3 years, it's been a lot easier to talk to parents about cutting out dairy. It's been profoundly easier, I would say. I think a little bit of that, fortunately or unfortunately, is because of the paleo type of talks that are going around with them cutting out dairy. So a lot of the parents are like, oh yeah, we've already cut out dairy. It's like, oh really? Like, yeah, we're paleo. And I'm like, oh.
Yes, yeah. I guess a lot of people now know it's one of those things you don't want in your diet anymore.
Yeah. So when you bring this up with the families, do you tell them that they have to go plant-based, or do you say, oh, let's incorporate more healthy stuff into your diet, like more fruits and vegetables, and cut out some of the bad stuff? How do you approach it?
I would say on a, patient by patient basis. As you know, you kind of have to meet people where they're at and where they're willing to listen. Within 7 minutes, I'm not, I don't have that level of optimism that I'm going to be able to flip them on a dime. So I kind of feel it out, and people are starting to kind of, I guess in my area, maybe know me that I'm a little bit more nutritional based. And so they will, sometimes say, well, the reason we picked you, Dr. George, is because we saw that you have a background in nutrition. So then they're more open to it. And I'm like, oh, I'm so glad that you brought that up, and I can delve more into it. But I would say, on a case-by-case basis, and I bring it up, probably the first thing I talk to my patients about, just sort of like across the board, is after 2 years of age, no reason for dairy, cut it out of your diet, switch over to soy milk, almond milk, we know better, do better. And they're like, oh, okay, and I'm like, okay. Just move on, because there's absolutely no reason. And, I talk to them about healthy eating and fruits and vegetables. And I tell them that there was an epidemiological study done that if children in the US ate one more fruit a day, there would be 20,000 less cases of cancer in children.
Isn't that amazing?
And they're like, what? And I'm like, that's the power of fruit. Eat your fruit,
Yeah, sure. I was going to delve into, let's talk about some of the specifics about a plant-based or vegan diet in children, and what are some of the things that you have to address, some of the myths you have to talk about, some of the the issues like people talk about children getting their fat, children getting their vitamins and stuff. Is a vegan diet okay for children?
Absolutely. And, I always forget the new name, but the American Dietetic Association, they go by a slightly different name now. They have, put that statement out there that, that is more, it's been a few years now, that a vegan, vegetarian diet is appropriate for every stage of life, including infancy, childhood, adolescence, during pregnancy, lactation, and even for athletes. And so that's been out there, it's well established. So it is 100%, and they actually go forward and even say in that statement that is probably healthier.
This is evidence-based advice that they give, right? It's not just an opinion, it's based on the data and the studies that are published.
Right, which is why it's important to have these kinds of organizations really step up to the plate and say that. Again, there's a lot of politics sometimes at play with some of these agencies because they are funded by, other entities. So yeah, it is evidence-based, and it has been out there for years now. So it is actually a healthier lifestyle. And as far as I don't know if you want me to go back to the acanthosis really quick, but the acanthosis nigricans, that is like a darkening, velvety kind of skin appearance on the back of the neck, and it can be in the armpit areas as well. That can be an early sign that there is some extra hormones that are, putting like excessive insulin that is probably putting that child at risk for diabetes. And so it is sort of a visual cue to test that child to see if there's a elevated A1C or glucose levels, to make sure that they're not turning into a risk for diabetes.
Is that typically a type 1 diabetic?
2.
Type 2, okay.
And so how do you address then any of those concerns with the parents when you see that some of your patients might be a little bit on the heavier side?
It's a touchy subject because sometimes the parents themselves are overweight, or sometimes I've already talked, or they bring it up to me and they're like, Dr. George, I've tried everything, and so it is a very, you have to be very careful in how we approach that, because children are listening, and they can, psychological aspect of it is just as important as the, clinical, like the body aspect of it. So, how I approach it is, again, case by case. One of the biggest things, the approach I take, I would say, is to talk about adding in rather than taking out. So don't focus on like, okay, you can't eat your Doritos, you can't have your soda, you can't have, I'll say, just water, no juice, no soda. And just as a, blanketed statement, but not, directed at a child that is having this obesity issue. And so I think it's important to take that approach, because just the way our minds work, it becomes from a more positive place. So if we're talking about, let's eat a whole big bowl of different vegetables, let's go to the grocery store, pick a crazy vegetable that looks really weird on a Saturday, look up a recipe, try to figure out how to make it a home project, make it fun. We have to remember the tools that companies like cereal companies use and why it's so effective in children, because they make it fun, they make it interesting, colorful, they use cartoons with high voices. It's this positive reinforcement that we have to use to get through to our children. So I would say I use that crowding out, so adding in more fruits and vegetables, modeling behavior, talking to parents about they're not going to do something you're not doing or that you make a face about. So if you make a face every time, somebody brings up broccoli, your child's not going to eat broccoli.
Well, so much of this is a behavioral issue. You can't just tell them, hey, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. There's got to be, you got to have figure out the way to do it.
Right, exactly. And, for eons now, right, doctors have just been like sort of dictators and been like, do. Okay, see me in a week, But I think there's, more research showing that that's not as effective as we had hoped.
What are some other common issues that you see in your patients?
So one of the big ones I treat with this plant-based approach is constipation, chronic constipation issues. I've had so many success stories now with children that have been through GI, that are still on Miralax, that have been on Miralax, that, done probiotics, they say they're eating so much more fiber and they're using the Metamucil and the Benefibers and all those kinds of things. And, again, talking to them about cutting out dairy. There has been so successful in my chronic constipation groups, and even the infants, some of them on these cow's milk based formulas, and changing them to like either a soy based or, plant-based formula has been very successful. And so that, and chronic ear infections has also been really successful. People don't realize that, that dairy can make the body create more mucus. And so when we have so many examples of that, even in adults and younger people, that when they've gotten off dairy, their mucus and their sinus infections and allergies get so much better. And so I've had so many good cases, and I'm laughing because I had this case where this baby she was only like 18 months old, and she was doing so much better off of dairy. And, she was just on the verge of getting ear tube surgery because of the chronic ear infections. And the families was like, I really don't want to put her through surgery. What can I do? And so, we did this, and she was doing great. And then the dad was like, she's fine, she's doing great. And started giving her milk again. And within like a week, she got an ear infection. And it was like, and the mom was like shaking her head at him at the visit, like, I told him not to do it. And, so it was like, it really, like, it worked like with precision. And then as soon as she got the milk back, she got another ear infection. And he was like, I'm sorry, it's my fault.
Maybe that helped it reinforce to them to keep her off of dairy. Yeah.
No, it did, for sure. Yeah. So after that, they were believers,
So another thing about kids, some people think that kids shouldn't be on a vegan diet or plant-based diet because they don't get enough fat in their diet. And what do you say about that, and how do you address it?
In children, they actually do need more fat in their diet. But by no means is it hard to get. Luckily we live in most of us live in this country where there's an abundance, and we can find, flaxseed, chia seeds, nut butters, avocados, like all these good sources of fats. And so, for some of the plant-based families that follow me, I just make sure they understand that children do need more fat in their diet. It's not like the 10% that adults need, between, there's like 30 to it's like 40% and 30 to 40% as they get older. And it's just adding like an extra tablespoon of like hemp seed, hulled hemp seeds on their hemp hearts is another name for it, where you sprinkle it on their food that they're already eating. They don't even taste it. Flaxseed in a smoothie. They get not just apple slices, they get apple slices with nut butter on it. It's not hard. For some of my patients or families that are a little bit more, they need to have a little bit more structure and make sure they're doing it well. I just tell them, take a couple of days and put it in your chronometer, or, I think MyFitnessPal or something like that, where you're tracking it for 2 days in like a typical 2 days of eating. And then you'll know for sure that they're getting enough. And so, sometimes some of the families before the pandemic, I used to meet with them like at Starbucks and kind of like walk them through it. And they would write down like food journals. And because some of my patients, like they weren't gaining weight or some other issue, or they're gaining too much weight. And so I'll kind of like walk them through like, okay, let's tweak this, tweak that. And, that would help them out a lot. But, now, I started kind of getting more dependent on like chronometer and things like that. So that families would feel more secure in, okay, I'm reaching that percentage. I know I'm doing enough. This is what it looks like. I can do it, so.
How much more fat does a child need? Is it more early on and then it decreases over time? Or
so it's about 40% in infancy. And then it goes to like 30% around, I think don't quote me, I have this written down somewhere, but 3 to 6 years of age. And then, 6 to like 10 years of age, it's, 20%. So it kind of gradually goes down. And then just about like 15, it depends on, boys and girls are different, but girls need a little bit more fat longer, but girl around 12 years of age, it, can reach around 15%. So
how do you support parents when they have picky eaters at home?
That is one of the biggest questions we have, just in general in pediatrics. I think it's, I always say, like, back in the days when porridge was the only option, nobody was picky eater, It's just that we have such a variety of food nowadays, and people are, convenience, is above everything else, I feel like. So when we get to those convenience foods, they're high salt, high fat, high sugar foods. And so they totally corrupt our children's taste buds. And so when you may even notice that with adults, when they're eating this high salt, high fat diet, when you try to take it out, those first few days are like, the mind's like, no, why did you do this to me? Because as human creatures, as animals, we are, driven towards these high calorie, high salt foods because they're so rare in nature that if you found a source, your brain is like, go back, and so we have to like outsmart our basic instincts sort of and be like, nope, I'm doing the right thing for you. Even though this tastes like cardboard now, in about 2 weeks, you're going to start to taste those sugars, those natural sugars, natural level once your taste buds readjust. And so with our children that are picky eaters, we have to do it gradually, but I always tell parents, don't become a short order cook. You know you're doing the right thing. You just have to give it time, modeling good behavior, and then just offering, those foods on a regular basis. Make it fun, make it interesting, get your kids involved. There are children in California that are 4 years old eating kale salads. Like, why? How is that happening, right? Like, they're coming home to their families with like smoothie recipes, like, Mom, can you make this kale cucumber carrot smoothie for me? And they're like, excuse me, who are you? And their parents are eating healthier because of them, right? Because their school programs have them gardening, they have them growing the kale, they have them in the classroom with a blender, making these little different smoothies. They're making them, how do we make a purple smoothie? How do we make a, orange smoothie? What things do we add, and they make it fun. And so we have to, again, go back to the marketing, because it's all about the marketing. We have to make it fun and interesting and get them involved. Even if you're growing rosemary or mint on your windowsill, if you just tell your child, can you grab a little rosemary? Can you add it to the pot? They're like, cool, let me try that. That sounds so interesting, And they're interested in eating then. And, unfortunately, we've gotten away from these home life skills, like some of parents don't even know how to cook these days. So it's a little extra hard.
I have a sister who's still teaching, and she says that every child has to take a carton of milk still whether they want to drink it or not, even if they're lactose intolerant and have said that they do not want to drink the milk. And then the teachers have to go to each children's tray and open each carton of milk. It has to be opened. Sometimes I think about that, even if parents' intentions are to feed the children healthier options, they still have to fight the school system.
Yeah, I mean, my patients and families know me, so I write letters left and right about them not having to have dairy products in their diet. For my plant-based families, I'm like, let me know, like doctor's letter, just because this is ridiculous. I mean, they're like, everything goes if you have a doctor's letter. I'm like, let me just churn them out, because there's absolutely no reason this child needs to have dairy in their diet. They are like 7 years old, and
So tell us more about that place for parents that might be listening. How can we go to our pediatrician and ask them, what would a letter look like? And is it only for milk or?
Well, I wouldn't say that all pediatricians are going to be able to, are going to write this letter. Being a plant-based pediatrician, knowing the harmful effects of dairy, I know it's not good for them, and I have no problem writing that letter. For, again, as a pediatrician, before I did my research, I was of the mindset that children need 2 to 3 servings of dairy a day. That is the rhetoric that we are taught as pediatricians, and that's the rhetoric a lot of pediatricians are still swearing by.
The American Pediatrics Association just came out with the position statement again, saying that they recommend dairy on a daily basis for children.
I always tell my patients, I'm like, in 10 years, as your pediatrician, at least you'll know that a doctor and a physician stood in front of you and told you the truth and what was coming down the pipeline. So you have this knowledge now. It took over 20 years for the Surgeon General's report on smoking to be written. And so here we are around that same timeline. And I'm like, you're getting this information from a physician. So, at least in 10 years, when everybody else understands this, you'll be like, I knew it. My doctor told me 10 years ago.
I got 2 medical questions, 2 more. What's your opinion about early menarche occurring in our country? Why is it happening? Also, is there an association between dairy and type 1 diabetes?
The early, I say menarche, I don't know, menarche, that is happening.
I'm a vascular surgeon. What do I know?
It's okay. That is happening in our, in most Western countries, actually, is a direct link to animal protein intakes. So it's been established that the higher animal protein intake that is found in, even actually, it could be even found, I think, well, I won't say that, but it, that is found in children from, early ages, has been linked to early, menarche is when your daughter first starts her period. That has been linked to your rates of animal protein intake in your diet directly. And so, countries like in Europe and in the US, unfortunately, because of the higher rates of meat intake that have been happening over the last few decades, we've slowly noticed the age of that first period has been decreasing. So, back, I don't know if you want to say like 1700s or before, menarche was happening around 16. And now we are closer to 11, 12 years of age. And so, it's kind of makes sense, right? Like you have like Sweet 16 and Quinceañera and all these kinds of things where it was like celebrating, a girl going into being a woman. And, now that's happening like, what are we going to have, like onset, or I don't know. It's happening so much younger now. And it's almost like you could draw the lines with increasing dairy and decreasing age of that first period. So, it's startling because, again, this is being shown in like epidemiological studies, but nobody's talking about it, right? Like pediatricians aren't told to say, hey, let's decrease this animal protein intake.
So are there any negative health consequences of starting earlier?
So the idea behind that is, is there, I think that's, evolving. I personally don't know of any like concrete studies, but the concept is that if you're starting your periods earlier, then you are extending how many years of, how do I describe it? Like your reproductive years. And so it's, more chance of risk of cancer and, hormonal issues later in life. So breast cancer, uterine cancer, ovarian cancer, things like that, because that age is decreasing. So the younger that age, the higher the risk of these issues later on in life.
Because in women, many of these things are hormonally dependent.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what about the diabetes and dairy?
So I was shocked to know to read that cow's milk actually increases the rate or chances of development of type 1 diabetes in children. I mean, this seems shocking to me that if this was the only thing we knew about dairy and why we shouldn't be offering it to our children, this across the board would be enough information to stop giving our children dairy. And it's as if, type 1 diabetes is sort of, it is promoted like, oh, it's a genetic issue, there's no way to stop it. And that's kind of how I came out of medical school and residency, was like, oh, if you have type 1 diabetes, that's just terrible. And, there was nothing you could have done differently. And now, seeing some of these links with the increasing risk of type 1 diabetes with your increased dairy intake is shocking. I'm like, wait, so, nothing's a silver bullet, right? Like, I never want to say like, oh, if you do this, you won't get it. No, that's not true with anything, but you can decrease your risk. And with the rates of type 1 diabetes increasing in this country, certainly we should take pause and turn that, around, or decrease that risk in our children wherever possible.
Right. And of course, when someone gets type 1 diabetes at a very young age, as a juvenile, that's an early death sentence. Their lifespan's not going to be the same as a traditional American, and it's going to be a harder life full of disease and chronic illness and other complications.
Absolutely. It's a lifelong illness, right? So it's where the insulin is just not being produced. And so type 2 diabetes is a little bit different, and we can see a little bit more reversal on that. But type 1 diabetes, we can help mitigate it a little bit, even, with our best efforts, but that's a lifelong chronic disease that sets you up for long-term, very detrimental issues along with early mortality. Yes.
Yeah. So like blindness, kidney disease, heart disease, I guess a whole host of problems, neuropathies, nerve problems.
Never mind the psychological impacts of that as a child, knowing that you have to take shots and you can't eat like other children and you're different, that's huge. I think, more and more in medicine, we're having to bind this, heart, kidney, body and mind, like the mind part of it. Even though we have all these specialties, they're all of the same person, right? I can change your mindset on something and your body can heal, right? This is essentially the placebo effect, right? You believe it's going to heal you, and it does, even though it's just a sugar pill. So, the mind of it and the psychological aspect of it is sometimes worse than anything else. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was interested in seeing if we can move on a little bit to learning a little bit more about yourself, your interest in lifestyle medicine, and some programs that you participated in.
Yeah, I've done a few different forums and panels, here in Houston, just, doctor panels with different questions. I've been developing my website, doing some blog posts on there, and, just trying to do our part in spreading the word. I was just part of this recent breast cancer awareness summit with hippocratesdocs.com. That was in collaboration with PCRM, which is your Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, with Dr. Neil Barnard. And I was the interviewer for, that series, which was so fun to meet everybody. And I got to, talk to Dr. Riz here. And it was, getting that awareness out. And from a pediatric point of view, if you had talked to me I've been doing this for, almost 5 years now, but you talked to me 6 years ago, I would have been like, what's a pediatrician doing on a breast cancer awareness, summit? Kids don't have to worry about this. And I would have thought the same way. And, being here in Houston, we have one of the biggest cancer centers, MD Anderson. I used to send my patients to MD Anderson from New York, actually. And we had a representative come down to our office and was just sort of doing an intro about, their pediatric wards and stuff. And so she told us that they were having 12 and 13-year-olds with breast cancer. And I was like, I'm sorry, come again? And this was pretty early on when I joined that practice and was starting to integrate my plant-based messaging. And that just blew me away. And I was just like, okay, I'm on my game now. I can't be, as a pediatrician, knowing dairy increases your risk of breast cancer, cannot not tell people that this is a huge risk if we are literally having children with breast cancer. So
what contributes to childhood breast cancer?
I think, I mean, literally, it's probably the amount of dairy. I don't know officially. I don't even know that they've started studying it yet because this is new, but the importance of breast tissue development, again, your age of menarche is decreasing and that breast tissue starts to develop before you start your period. So those early years when you're developing that breast tissue, if there are hormones and growth factors and, like all the estrogen and all that influencing that breast tissue growth and cellular division, then you can imagine that if that cellular division is going awry because of all that growth hormone and estrogens and all that, then, honestly, I guess it makes sense. And if you're getting that influence from even in utero, just like we know, heart disease starts in utero. Right? That means like within your fetus, like there have been studies done where they have found fatty streaks, which are the first signs of heart disease and clogged arteries in fetuses that were stillborn, where they did autopsy reports and things like that. So, I mean, that again was another study that just gave me pause. I mean, God, you don't ever, like, you almost didn't want them to do that study. Like how could we know that this is happening in utero and not change things, right? But so heart disease itself is starting in utero. So what if we went back and looked at, some of these reports of breast tissue, is it starting at like as soon as those breast tissue cells are dividing before we can even see it on the body? And so that's probably a lot to do with it.
Yeah, I think the way I look at it is we're creating this in the right milieu or environment within these young children's bodies to promote cancer. We're with our diet, they're getting earlier menarche, and with our diet, they're getting high exposure to estrogens, and then because of our standard American diet, it's a very pro-inflammatory and pro-cancer environment. So we're doing everything we can to cause cancer at a younger age in these children. So it doesn't, it's shocking, but it's not surprising.
Exactly. That's probably so well put, like, I'm like, at first I'm taken aback and then I'm like, yeah, I guess so. I mean, if we can find heart disease, then we can find breast cancer and, liver problems and all of that. Right.
Yeah. The way I look at it is if you walk out in front of a car, you're going to get hit, so it's shocking, but it's not surprising.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So as you're developing your website, are you going to be offering any sort of virtual classes for your patients or for parents to offer them tips?
So on my website, I have an area where that people can sort of email me and sign up for like a free 30-minute consultation. Again, most of what I do on as far as the plant-based side is just, labor of love. I just want to get that message out there, so I just, as much as I can, they can contact me and, pick my brain on what they, their curiosities on plant-based or just going plant-based completely. This is, my passion in life. Again, just letting people know how good the good is, and how we can turn things around and give our children the best opportunity, for success later in life, because these habits have to change early. Your eating habits are essentially established by 7 years old. So whatever your habits or your family's habits and things like that have been up until that age, and it seems so young. And when I first read that, I was kind of like, oh, wow. Like if you look at a 7-year-old, like they've already established how they're going to eat for the rest of their life, and that's what the studies are showing. So we need to be very cognizant and mindful of, families are like, oh, my grandfather had the same problem. I have the same problem. I'm like, well, were you guys all eating the same way? It's like you were eating pot roast with your grandparents. You're eating pot roast now. So it's like, oh, we're all high cholesterol. So that's just our genetics, right? But it's only like 2 to 5% of issues that are actually genetic, right? Most of it, even the genetic things we can influence, we know now with our understanding of epigenetics, which is the expression of our genes that we can actually change based on, again, that milieu we create in our environment. So just because you have your gene doesn't mean that that's your, end result. Like you can actually, again, select and be like, no, not going to select that gene. We're going to skip over that and just keep going.
Do you have any tips for parents?
Tips for parents would be just, be creative, but be mindful also, probably more importantly, of the foods that we are creating a narrative around. Let's make rewards more things like, picking the movie on Friday night, or, doing a nail polish day, or spending an hour just one-on-one time, things like that, versus like, if you do this, you'll get your candy. If you do this, we'll go out for ice cream. I really love for that to be a message that changes, with our parents, or, making the reward a fruit salad. But, I think it's probably more likely that we can change those reward systems away from these types of foods, because these are, again, habits people are falling back on later in life. So whenever, you have a bad day at work, it's like, well, I had a bad day, so I'm going to go drink a beer, or I had a bad day, I'm going to go eat a donut. So let's try to get away from those things and do things that are more constructive. And again, just, think twice before. I mean, the first two things I cut out of my patient's diet is dairy, which is cow's milk products, goat's milk. People always ask me about that, but essentially same idea, because it's an animal protein. So dairy, goat's milk, all those kind of products, try to cut that out. There are non-dairy options available in every single store nowadays, so there's no, reason not to try it. And two is processed meats, because we know it's a type 1 carcinogen. So processed meats include anything that's not right off the animal. I mean, obviously I want everyone to go plant-based, but these are the first two changes I tried to get people to make on that journey. And it's because of its profound effect in the body almost immediately. And taking away can cause so much benefit almost, I don't want to say immediately, but very quickly. So take those foods out. Processed meats, again, are like your deli meats, your luncheon meats, which people are surprised to hear about. Sausages, bacon, curated meats like prosciutto, pepperoni. Get all that stuff, that junk out of your diet. That is number one priority. And model good behavior. If you're not eating, the bean burrito, they're not going to eat the bean burrito. If you're not eating the broccoli, they're not going to eat it. So model good behavior and make the good super exciting and as amazing as it is. So.
All right. Well, I think that's wonderful advice. I think those are two great places to start, actually. Those, there's a million places you can start, but those have a tremendous impact right away.
Yeah. Right.
And how can people learn more from you?
My website is roxannegeorgemd.com. So ROXANNE, George, just like George Washington, MD at MD.com. So, so, I kind of have little things starting over there, and feel free to reach out to me. I'm pretty available. If you're in the North Houston area, Google me and you can find me, my practice. And I'm on plantbaseddocs.com, where you can do like a search engine for a plant-based doctor in your area. I'm on like vegan parenting groups and things like that on Facebook. So try to give my 2 cents there, especially in the Woodlands area. I feel like my name has gotten pretty widespread over there. And so if you're around, or if you're anywhere in the country, just use that search engine, plant-based docs, to find a plant-based physician near you to help support you through this journey. And if not, just, reach out to somebody via their email. If you need a pediatrician, of course, more than happy to help. But if it's like internal medicine or something like that, we're actually so excited about this movement, and this is our passion, that there's so many of us, just waiting to help. So feel free to contact, and, I'm sure you'll be able to find someone to help you on this journey.
All right, Dr. George, thank you very much. We've enjoyed having you on the show. Best of luck to you.
I appreciate it. This was so much fun. Thank you for letting me be here.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. You've been listening to the Plant-Based DFW podcast show. If you like our content, please like, share, and leave a review. Our goal is to provide quality episodes to help support the community.